The first thing I'd say to anyone who wants to be more creative in Planet Zoo is to make natural barriers wherever you can, and I have 4 great tips for how to do this. Tip 1 is to use water to separate your animals from your guests. If you lower the terrain at the border of your habitat and place water in it, making sure that you don't fill the water to the top, your animals won't be able to climb out, creating a natural barrier between them and your guests. This is actually done in real-life zoos such as Artist Zoo in Amsterdam in order to make it feel like there's no physical barrier between you and the animals. But if you don't want to lower the terrain the whole way around the habitat, another way to use natural water barriers is to make sure you're sufficiently blocking your water areas off with rocks and logs so that when you check your animal's traversable area, they can't swim their way out. Tip 3 is to sink your entire habitat below the ground level to create a natural terrain barrier that your animals can't scale. This also helps ensure your guests have a good view of the animals, provided you don't make it too deep. Now, similarly to before, if you want to create a natural barrier but you don't want to sink the habitat down, use rock walls to block off your habitat. And if you want the barrier to look more attractive, you could even turn one of those rock formations into a waterfall. This is especially easy to do if you have the Aquatic Pack DLC, as this is ready-built waterfall pieces that can be easily slotted together. However, adding a lot of rocks and foliage to your zoo can be very time-consuming and a bit repetitive. My best tip for this is to create a small area of rocks and foliage which you're happy with, and then select all of it, duplicate it with Ctrl D, and place it again in another location. If you use the Z key to rotate it, you really can't tell that it's the same area copied and pasted, especially if you go back at the end and move a few items manually. Now, if you're keen to build yourself custom buildings for your facilities, my top tip is to place down your facilities first and then add the doors and windows to them. This will help you visualize the shape of your final building and often sparks imagination for how you could rearrange the facilities to provide the building shape that you want. Then it's simply a case of fleshing out the building with construction wall and roof pieces, and voila! You have your final building. If you want to create an interestingly shaped building, domes can be a unique piece of architecture which will stand out in your zoo. I've created a 60-second tutorial on how you can create domes simply and easily in Planet Zoo. Tip 8 is to use dedicated viewing areas for your habitats. Viewing platforms can be easily created by placing a path and clicking the Align to Grid button. You can then click the path you just placed and create a square viewing area. You can even extend this over your habitats for better visibility. This technique can also be used to create a perfect square in the center of a large open path area or plaza, perfect to slot your exhibits into. If you don't want your viewing areas to be square, you can use circular viewing areas by placing a path and placing additional paths at right angles to the previous paths until they join up into a circle. The use of the Align to Grid path function and guest barriers together can create some beautiful plaza areas for your guests. For this, you simply need to create a plaza using exactly the same method as the square viewing area, and then place guest barriers where you don't want your guests to walk. These can be sunk into the ground and will still stop guests from walking through them, so get creative with it. When I'm creating a path in my zoos, I want the paths to connect to each other in a clean way, and I achieve this quickly by turning angle snap on your paths. This is just a quick method to ensure that your paths always branch off each other at clean angles, which in my opinion makes your zoo layout much more aesthetic. My top tip for creating slopes or stairs in Planet Zoo is to make them the length and height that you want them to be. Custom slopes and stairs can be created by first placing a path where the start of your slope or stairs is. Then, if you hold the control button, you'll notice that you're able to place the next path much more freely. You can find a distance from the original that you're happy with, and then hold down the shift key to raise or lower it. If you place the second path, you'll be able to link it to your original path and create a novel slope or staircase which can add variety to your zoo, or simply help you grant access to an area which is proving difficult. Another tip surrounding the pathing system is to use the guest gates to create very narrow paths. If you place guest gates, you're able to create narrow paths, and once placed, the guest gates can be removed and replaced with normal paths which join to your existing zoo. These narrow paths could be used for maintenance routes for your staff or narrow bridges over habitats. Whatever your imagination could come up with, really. Burrow cameras are a great way to give visibility to your guests without disturbing your animal in its burrow. These simply need to be placed in a location your guests can access and then linked to your burrow. I'd also encourage you to get creative with your restaurants. These can be created by first placing the restaurant piece, which will give you a beautiful functioning kitchen, and then you can choose what they'll be serving and how much it will cost your guests by going into the prices tab. Your guests will enter your restaurant here and will speak to your friendly staff, who will then direct them into this black void around the corner here. Now, if you place some of these tables and chairs and link them to your restaurant, then your guests will be transported instantly from the black void into the tables and chairs. And the amazing thing about this is that the tables and chairs don't have to sit on a path, so you can create multi-story restaurants with guests eating on the top floors without any path connection other than the restaurant entrance. Also, the color of these tables and chairs can be customized, which adds a lot of variant into what you can create with them. Now, you don't have to have the Aquatic Pack DLC to enjoy underwater habitats. If you do have it, I'm going to assume that fondness has turned into a full-on love affair. And one of my favorite ways to show off your underwater animals in their habitats is to use a path on one side of the habitat that slopes down below the ground level, and then place a large glass wall on that side of the habitat. This enables your guests to see your animals above the water, and then have a dedicated side of the habitat where they can explore the underwater activities your animals are getting up to. But the creativity doesn't have to stop there. If you wanted to create a unique underwater experience for your guests, consider using the circular viewing areas I spoke about earlier and placing one inside the habitat before you add any water. Then build around it with glass barriers and add the water into the habitat so that your guests can walk into the underwater area and feel like they're swimming with your animals. A big tip for underwater habitats is to test the depth of the water area to ensure your underwater feeders are at least 8 meters deep so that they can work properly. This can be easily done by carving out the underwater area with the terrain stamp tool, or by using construction pieces to measure how deep your existing water area is. Similarly, I'd adopt either of these methods to make sure that any tunnels or obstacles you've placed in the habitat which you want your animals to swim through are at least 4 by 4 meters. This is the size of a standard wall construction piece. If they're not this size, your animals may not be able to swim through them. Now, a bonus tip for creating underwater habitats is to create underwater tunnels so your guests can walk through your underwater habitats and see your animals swimming around them. Now, full disclaimer, I understand this was not an intended feature and may not work in the future if Frontier decide to patch it, so don't blame me in the comments if you decide to do this and it doesn't work. But if you're feeling like a daredevil, this is how you do it. First, place a path in the area planned to be your underwater habitat area, ensuring that tunneling is turned on. I would suggest making the path either 4 meters or 8 meters wide, as these sizes will fit a lot of the construction pieces later. Note that this path is slightly lower than the top of your tunnel will be at the end, so don't make it too shallow if you want your animals to swim over the tunnel. In fact, I'd make sure this path is at least 6 to 8 meters below ground level, or even deeper than that if you want it to be. Next, lower your path with the J key twice and place one path section. Then level out your path by pressing the U key twice and place another path section. Now you can delete the first 2 path sections and close off the hole you've made in your habitat with the flatten to foundation tool. Next, replace the water into your habitat. Now, if you click on the path tool, you can still continue extending your path underneath the habitat, making sure that tunneling is still on. This will form your tunnel. Also, make sure to raise the paths at the ends and connect them to the rest of your zoo. Now you can go back into your tunnel and add glass construction pieces, and this is why it's best to use 4 meter or 8 meter wide paths, as most of the construction pieces are either 4 meters wide or they're half pieces at 4 meters wide, which would make them 8 meters wide if you join them together. And an extra bonus tip is to check out my top 10 mistakes in Planet Zoo video to make sure you're not running into any of the common frustrating mistakes while playing. See what I did there?